First of all, do these reports of the security forces targeting women, do they match what you are hearing on the ground?
Absolutely. You have to remember that as of this morning, there has been at least 700 protesters killed, according to the information provided by the Network of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which is the principal Iranian resistance movement with a vast network inside the country. Among them, at least 70 children as young as 2 years old, and there have been 30,000 people who have been detained. So in that context, you can see what kind of a savagery we are facing, and this regime has no restraints of using any kind of violence one can imagine against protesters, as we have witnessed in the past 84 days throughout the country.
How do you respond also then to news of the first known execution of a protester with 5 more people sentenced to death?
Actually, the number is much bigger. There are at least a dozen protesters who have been sentenced to death, and dozens more who face that kind of a tragic situation because the regime charged them with what's called muharaba, which is enmity towards God. And basically, this regime views itself as the representative of God on earth, and they can use this kind of accusations to basically kill dissidents. You have to remember, in the past 40 years, some 120,000 dissidents have been executed simply for standing for human rights and democracy. This is the type of savage, inhumane regime we are facing in Iran. And what was the charge for the victim? He was charged with blocking a street during the protests. So this is the type of a regime we are facing in Iran. But what's, I think, remarkable, that despite this kind of a heavy crackdown, the protests have continued for the past 84 days unabated, despite such brutality.
It is difficult to an extent, isn't it, to understand exactly what's going on. Internet blackouts continue, the repression we're talking about already, and so trying to sort of understand and get an understanding of what is happening on the ground there can be quite difficult. But have the protests evolved at all in the 84 days since they began? And by that I mean clearly the response of the security forces is harsh and is harshening. And I'm just wondering if the protesters are changing in any sort of way to kind of match that or counteract that.
Absolutely. As Madam Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, put it yesterday, the execution of the protesters basically meant that the regime is getting desperate. They are getting worried about the possibility of being overthrown and the prospect of being overthrown by the protesters. So in that sense, the fact that it has continued for 84 days, it speaks volumes. It shows that the nation has risen up. People from all walks of life, all age groups, and all over the country, from different nationalities and different ethnicities, are united in one goal: to overthrow this regime. It's quite evident that the people's demand and goal is to overthrowing this regime. And obviously, the MEK resistance students have had a big role in organizing, leading, and continuity of the protest as of now. So basically, you have a nation which has risen up for its rights, men and women, especially young people, who will not stop at anything but getting rid of this regime. I think the reaction that we saw from Tehran and elsewhere yesterday, even to some international media from the protesters, saying that this has only increased the resolve to go all the way, is quite indicative of where we are at today and we are leading to. Obviously, as you said, the regime resorts to all sorts of tactics: killing, torturing, arresting, blocking internet, to prevent and to stymie the continuation of the protest, but as of no avail as of now. And I think from all indications, it will continue. There might be ebbs and blows as we go forward, but that's quite evident that the people are determined to go forward.
I suppose, Shahin, there are a number of outcomes here, but among them, revolution and overturning the regime, or indeed, it's not unthinkable that this could lead to some sort of civil war and prolonged violence.
Actually, Iran has been facing a civil war, but the world has not paid much attention to it. As I said, 120,000 dissidents have been executed, not alone hundreds of thousands who have been incarcerated and severely tortured in the past 40 years. This regime has nothing to do with Iran. It's like an invading army. And as we go forward, it's quite evident that the people and the resistance are one side, and the regime and its cohorts are on the other side. So The fact that this regime has unleashed all kinds of violence against the people is known fact, as you just mentioned in beginning from the story, which I think Guardian wrote yesterday about how they target women deliberately and other kind of a savage behavior that we just talked about. So in that sense, so far as this regime is concerned, violence is part and parcel of its survival. It's in its DNA. What's I think important here to remember is the reaction by the international community. It's time for the world to see the heroic uprising of the Iranian people who, by chanting death to Khamenei, death to oppressor being the Shah or Khamenei, are clearly showing that they want freedom, democracy. They are chanting freedom, freedom, freedom every day. So the world here has to come on their side. And by that, obviously, nobody's asking any boots on the ground or any military support or even financial support. There are some very concrete political steps. First, recognizing the right of Iranian people to defend themselves and to resist and to bring about regime change by themselves, for a free, democratic, secular Iran. Two, close down the Iranian regime's embassies in the world. These embassies have no function but to espionage, facilitate terror, and justify this kind of a savagery inside the country. Three, include IRGC, the main institute and entity for repression in Iran, as a terrorist entity, which is long overdue. And I think by these concrete steps, the world can hold the regime accountable for its misdeeds. I think the time that there will be only verbal condemnation is long past. And I think it's about time that the world shows a robust reaction. One has to remember, there are many, many people who are in death row in Iran, who are in danger to be executed. And what kind of firm reaction we see by the international community, UK, US, EU, and the world over, is very, very crucial at this juncture.